Hello everyone. Welcome to monthly current affairs series of Amrita IS, and this is the session on polity. First one, within the institutions, we'll look at the thing being released by Election Commission. That is, the series of timelines have been released according to which the people who are contesting the elections have to submit their criminal antecedents, right? For example, three times they have said that three times they have to publish in the newspapers and television, right? Now, first, publicity, you don't have to remember the dates, obviously. It's just a context to a broader problems of the Indian politics, that is the criminalization of the politics. Now, for those who are uncontested, those who are fighting uncontested, they also have to publicize about their criminal antecedents, even if you are not competing with anyone in that particular election, right? So that, what is the idea behind it? So that people are more informed. If we are going to vote for this particular candidate, how many criminal cases he has against him. So the idea is to make more informed choices, empowering voter with more information. Last year also we talked about the criminalization of politics. Last year Supreme Court's judgment has come. Supreme Court has made mandatory for the political parties to publish, including the official social media pages, the details of the cases against the candidate and the reasons for selecting them over the others. That why this candidate has been preferred over the others, or what are the qualities this candidate brings. So you can see, against the criminalization of politics, this is the steps taken by the Supreme Court, and this is being, you can say, step taken by the Election Commission of India. Okay. Now, something about criminalization of politics, it's a proper GS2, and in your optional, some of your optionals, this is a very important topic, right? For example, topic on democracies, in political science paper 1 part B, important topic of criminalization of politics. So in the subsequent years, in the Lok Sabha, for example, you can see increasing number of the people with the criminal cases. For example, in 2019 Lok Sabha, around 43% of the winners have the criminal cases against them, and out of which with 29% are having the serious criminal cases. The important fact here is, you can see doubling of the rate within the two Lok Sabhas of the serious criminal cases. Now, top court has last year also talked about that we need to keep these people away from the parliament, because the consequences being that makers became the law breakers, or law breakers became the law makers, and this is not healthy for a democracy. Okay. So this is just for main. So criminalization of politics leads to, for example, if you see goons sitting in the parliament having so many criminal cases, your public apathy increases. When your public apathy increases, the political party also do not care. So inner party democracy also reduces, and the focus is on the winnability of the candidate. If that candidate is a, let's say, Bahubali in his area, he will be preferred over the other candidates. So that is the vicious cycle in which Indian politics is currently trapped. And yes, obviously, for this, a lot of steps have been taken, are being taken up. A lot of judgments have been taken up by the Supreme Courts. For example, this is the a lot of cases that you have to remember for your mains exam, just a timeline of it. So Union of India case, Lily Thomas case, very important case, where, for example, under which Lalu Yadav was disqualified. That if you are convicted of the jail term more than 2 years, you will lose your seat in the legislature immediately. Recently, the case has also been done for the Somnath Bharati in the Aam Aadmi Party. These are the lot of cases. Lok Prahari case, so mandatory disclosure of the source of income. Nota has been introduced in 2014. So these cases are important. Prelims perspective, very less, but from mains perspective, very important. The more and more cases you can quote in your answer, the better your answer will be. Impact of criminalization of politics. So that's what I was discussing on the parliament. It undermines the sanctity of the parliament. We tell that parliament is a temple of democracy. So when the criminalization of politics is there, that obviously that temple is defiled, isn't it? The lawbreakers and becomes lawmaker. The judiciary, so it questions over the judicial efficiency and judicial integrity. Why? Because these people have criminal charges. Now, why the cases have not been pursued? Especially the people who have very high stakes in the public policy making or the public legislations. So the questions are also raised on the judicial efficiency, judicial integrity as well, that why these people are getting away from these criminal cases. How can they very easily come out in public and they can fight the elections? Yes, the opportunity has been given, but that's the case. Overall democracy, it really results into a tainted democracy. Our electoral process, it showcases the flaws in our electoral process as well. So criminalization of politics is a very important and very big topic, not relatively big, but very objective topic. These are the problems, why this is there, impact, and the way forward. What are the steps have been taken by different stakeholders, government, Supreme Court, Election Commission? What are the recommendation, let's say, of Law Commission and all these things? This is how you can write your means answer as well. Next is something related to executive and legislature. First is the Mission Karmi Yogi. What do you need to remember from Mission Karmi Yogi? Mission Karmi Yogi is basically, few of the details are important from prelims perspective, very important in fact, and some of the details are this mission is going to be very important for mains. In the mains, the topic, that is GS2, role of civil services, and your GS4, whole ethics. Okay, so this is where this chapter is, this initiative is very important. So Mission Karmi Yogi is a new national architecture for the civil service capacity building. The name is National Program for Civil Services Capacity Building. You can see new national architecture, comprehensive reforms of capacity building at 3 level: individual level, institutional level, and process level. We will all these 3 reforms. Now, institutions are important. Let's say a Human Rights Council will be there to approve and monitor the civil service capacity building plans. Then capacity building commission will be made. Okay, that will harmonize the training standards, shared facility, we'll see the structure of it. Then one special purpose vehicle will be created that will create all the tools which are required. For example, one online learning platform, we'll discuss that, and facilitate world-class learning content and the marketplace. So the idea is, obviously, so these are the things they require in a government official or a civil servant. A domain and the functional competencies, goal driven, and behavioral competencies as well, promoting the ease of living, ease of doing business, and citizen centricity. So these are the keywords which you can use in your GS2 and your ethics paper and wherever it is required. So build future ready civil servants, right attitude, skills, knowledge aligned to the vision of new India. Competency led the capacity building, shared understanding of India's developmental aspiration, accountability, transparency, and scale of impact. So including a lot of people within this criteria. Citizen centricity, again, the same things. You can read it out from the PDF, but nothing to explain from Prince perspective. So it got basically 6 pillars you can see in this particular program. So first is I Got Karmi Yogi. This is the online platform which will be maintained by the SPV, special purpose vehicle, and it will be a digital platform where all these things will be available. They will create a policy framework, human resource management will be done, EHRMS, strategic human resource management to deliver the right competencies, behavioral, domain, and functional. Shift the rule to role. So basically they are requiring the civil servants to focus more on the role based jobs, because we have entered into an LPG reform. Economic survey says that we have to go to the idea of the invisible hand of the market, hand of trust of the government. So how this hand of trust will come? Hand of trust will come when the civil servants will be built to work in that environment. They will be working to facilitate the private sector or facilitate the markets, making sure that your policies are pro business and not pro crony. These are the ideas of the economic survey last year. Credible and autonomous institutional framework, and comprehensive continuous performance analysis, data driven goal settings, and real time monitoring of the civil servants as well. So this is the idea I Got platform. These are really nice words which has been given. For example, the civil servant: proactive and polite, professional, progressive, energetic and enabling, transparent and tech enabled, creative and constructive, imaginative and innovative. So this is the institutional structure that you need to keep in mind for prelims purpose. So highest body, that is Prime Minister, Human Rights Council, Cabinet Committee, Cabinet Secretariat Coordination Unit will be there, under which 2 things will be done. That is, one will be Capacity Building Commission, and second will be the SPV, which will look at the functional aspect and it will look at the standard aspect. So the apex body to drive the strategic direction, Capacity Building Commission to harmonize, train, standards, and all these things. cabinet secretariat coordination to monitor the progress, execution and plan, and SPV to own operate online platform, that is iGot, Karmyogi, and facilitate online class learning. Importantly, very important idea, you can say annual subscription. So civil servant has to pay 431 rupees per employee annually to get into this program. So it's a subscription based model, so the SPV will be self sufficient. Okay, so this is the Prime Minister's Human Rights, oh so not Human Rights, Prime Minister's Human Resource Council. Chairperson Prime Minister, some political leadership will be there, some leaders from national and global academicians, civil service, very experienced civil servants will be there. So and they will monitor all these things. Then you have the special purpose vehicle, again legal company under the section 8, 100% government ownership, and iGot platform. And the revenue model, as we have discussed, the self-sustaining, so they'll take the money from the civil servant itself. So key functions of SPV: own, operate, and you can read it out. So all they will do all the operational works. One of the pillars was the monitoring and the evaluation framework. So monitoring and the evaluation framework, and objective and transparent framework needs to be there. So Prime Minister dashboard, capacity building plans, annual state of civil service report, independent audits. So these things will be there. Third party audits of program in addition to regular audits, and quality assurance by the capacity building commission. Consolidated performance of civil services as a whole in year with the focus on achievement and contribution, and all these things. Chalo. The last thing that is similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Similarly, they have created the democratized civil services. So a silo less performance. So civil servant should also be aspiring to move from one step to the other. So professional delivery, professional growth, personal growth, esteem and recognition, and self-actualization. These are the terms which are critical for your essay ethics. For example, going forward, you can expect one essay on the civil services itself. For example, let's say from a rule-based to a role-based civil services, a new paradigm change for the new India, something like that. So you can expect one essay on the civil services as well, apart from the questions in your GS and all. Next topic within the legislative, that is question hour. So it was in the news because due to COVID-19, the government has suspended the question hour, and a lot of obviously hue and cries from the opposition parties, because question hour is a very important tool in ensuring the accountability of the executive or the government from the parliament. It is a tool in doing so, right? So question suspension of the question hour brings outrage, and CPI leaders called no question hour and just in the letter to the Rajya Sabha chairman. Now, this is not the first time which has been suspended. It's been, for example, 1962 war, it has been suspended. You can see here in the emergency era, you can also see that. So this is where it has been suspended before as well, question hour. Let us discuss something about the question hour. First of all, it finds mention in the rules of procedures of the house, in the both the houses, rules of procedure, they find mention. Usually it's the first hour, that is from 11 to 12 o'clock, there is a question hour. Okay, before, after 2 o'clock, they go for the agenda of the day. So in between you have lunch, and between you have 0 hour. So this is how it goes. So it's a first hour parliamentary tool for executive accountability. Now, the questions, type of question is important. The question are start question, unstart question, short notice question, and private questions to the private member. The first question is, why the question to the private member if it is a tool for extracting accountability from the executive? The idea is that if the private member is bringing some bill, let's say private member bill, then you can ask question to the private member. So if there is something which is related to that particular private member, then you can ask question to that particular private member. Okay. Then you have a starred question, star. So when someone is a star, you can imagine he will stand up. He's a star. He will stand up. So when he stand up, he answer orally. So answer will be given orally by the minister or the private member, and supplementary questions can be asked. If he is a star, supplementary questions can be asked. Unstarred questions, only written answers will be given, and no supplementary questions. Short notice questions are asked orally. They have to provide 10-day notice for the short notice question. Okay. Some more important thing, question hour is not scheduled on the day finance minister presents the budget. Some more details. So basically they have to give a 15-day notice for the question hour. the question they want to ask in the question are, they have to give the 15-day notice, and that is why the short notice wala, it's only for 10 days, hai na? Chalo. So if the member feels that after giving the answer he is not satisfied with the answer, then that procedure will be, then there will be discussion, and that will be known as the half an hour discussion. So these are the very key things that is important for your prelims. Then the permissible limit with respect to such questions are only 5 a day per member in Lok Sabha and 7 per day in Rajya Sabha. So these are very few key facts that you need to remember. Now compared to that, there is a 0 hour that I have mentioned, right? So 11 to 12 there is a time reserved for question hour. Then from 2 o'clock there is an agenda of the day, and in between you have the filler time, and that time can be filled with the 0 hour. Now the term 0 hour has been given because from 12 o'clock say start hota hai, it starts from that. Now it's an Indian innovation. For example, it does not exist in the rules of procedure. For example, parliamentary procedures taken from the United Kingdom's procedure. No, that's not there. How can you remember that? You can remember 0, innovation of India, right? India also gave 0. So from that you can recollect कि अच्छा ठीक है, in the parliament also the 0 hour is an Indian innovation. ठीक है? Something about 0 hour. So 0 hour not in the rules of procedure. It's an Indian innovation in the parliamentary procedure 1962. It's a time gap between the 0 question hour and the agenda of the day. So it's filled with the 0 hour. It's an informal device available to the MPs to raise the matter without the prior notice. So it is without the prior notice they can give, and they have to give the question at the start of the daily session. For example, you want to ask some question in the 0 hour, so you have to give in the morning to the speaker, and it's not mandatory to hold 0 hour. If the question hour stretches, then 0 hour is suspended. So it's just a filler in between. It started from 1962. Chalo, let us discuss one topic from judiciary, that was the death of the Keshwanand Bharati. So the Keshwanand Bharati died in September month, and Prime Minister has also said Keshwanand Bharati deeply attached to India's rich culture and great constitution. Now we don't have to go into the personality of the Keshwanand Bharati, obviously, but it gives us an opportunity to read about the Keshwanand Bharati case, which is one of the most seminal case in which the 13 bench court was set up, and one of the largest bench formed till date, 13 judge bench. So what was the context? We will also see the evolution of the basic structure with that. So the case, the Keshwanand Bharati versus the government of Kerala, the case dealt with the petition against the Kerala's government challenging the compulsory acquisition of his land by the government under the Kerala Land Reforms Act as a violation of fundamental rights as enshrined in Article 25, 26, and 31. So basically, he went into the Supreme Court when his land was taken away. Now, let us talk about the evolution of the basic structure. Then we'll come back to the Keshwanand Bharati case. Now, earlier, some cases have happened, that is Shankari Prasad case or Sajjan Singh case, in which it was held. Before that, let's talk about, there is an article in your constitution, Article 13. You must have read, it's a very classical debates. Article 13 part 2 says that if there is any law which violates the fundamental right, now judiciary has the right to put this law under the, can say that this law is an unconstitutional law and put that law as void. For example, if you see second part, the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the right conferred by this part, and any law made in the contravention to the extent of contravention will be void. This part means fundamental rights. That means if any law is created and that is violating the fundamental rights, then that law will be void. Okay, fine. Now the debate has come. Why? Now under Article 368, Parliament can amend the constitution. The power has been given to the Parliament. Now the question has come, when the Parliament amends a constitution and put up this Constitutional Amendment Act. Let's say they amended a constitution. Now whether that Constitutional Amendment Act is a part of the law or not, is that this is the law or not? So in their initial judgment, that is Shankari Prasad case or Sajjan Singh case, Supreme Court has held that parliament can amend any part of the constitution. That means that article 13(2) is confined only for the ordinary laws. So if any ordinary law, if that law is violating the fundamental right, then it will be void. But parliament can amend the constitution that does not fall into this premise. No, that is outside of it. Hence, parliament can do anything with respect to this article under article 368. Okay? So this was the case with the initial cases. Now comes the very important case, that is Golaknath case. Now the case happened in 1967 and it was also an 11 bench case. So previously Sankari Prasad case, Supreme Court held the power of the parliament to amend any part of the constitution including the fundamental rights. Now in this case everything was reversed. The Supreme Court has observed that article 368 is an amending power to the parliament. And the Supreme Court said that this amending power is equal to the legislative power. The power to make a law and power to the amending the constitution is equal. Hence, every law is similar to the amendment. If you're amending the constitution, is equivalent to the laws that you are making. So all the amendments are like the laws. Now this Constitutional Amendment Act will fall under this. If it falls under this, that means with the Constitutional Amendment Act, you cannot take away the fundamental right. So Article 13(2) prohibits state to make any law by taking away, abridging the fundamental rights. Hence, fundamental rights cannot be amended by the parliament because now this falls under this ambit. Now the fundamental rights are transcendental and immutable. And to amend the fundamental rights, what you have to do? Because now parliament cannot do so, you have to set up the constituent assembly. Very drastic judgment. So the balance of power between the judiciary and the parliament what went into the direction of the judiciary. Let's say this is judiciary, this is executive or legislative. Now judiciary is becoming heavy. Now parliament or executive does not have any authority to amend fundamental right. And obviously this will be not liked by the Indira Gandhi. So in her time, a lot of series of amendments have come in the parliament, 24th, 25th, 29th. 24th amendment has specifically written in the constitution that Constitutional Amendment Act are not laws. That means again reiterating the Sankari Prasad position. So these are the laws and these are the Constitutional Amendment Acts. With the Constitutional Amendment Acts, we can amend their fundamental rights and parliament can do anything. Similarly, Article 25, Amendment 25, they curtailed right to property. They say that if you are doing something under the DPSP of 39B and 39C, then you can violate the fundamental rights of 2014, 15 and 19, 21, sorry. 14, 19 and 21. Very basic idea. Huh? Now, again, now the balance of power shifted from judiciary to the government, executive. Now, executive is now heavy. Now, judiciary has come with the Keshwan and Bharti case, right? Now they will reverse this or they will do it very smartly. Okay, let's see. So as the hearing needed, as the Keshwan and Bharti case has come, his land was snatched. As the hearing proceeded, the scope of the case was expanded to address the following interpretation of the Golaknath case. So interpretation of Article 368, validity of 24th Constitutional Amendment Act, Section 2 and 3 of the 25th and 29th Constitutional Amendment Act. So we will do the constitutional analysis of it. Now, Keshwan and Bharti case, Supreme Court has come up with a basic structure doctrine. They said, okay, fine. Article 24, Amendment 24 is fine. Yes, you are right. Ki bhai, law is different and this Constitutional Amendment Act is different. And with the Constitutional Amendment Act, you can amend anything. Okay, fine. But you cannot amend the basic structure. Some of the things that are very basic to the Constitution, you cannot amend that. So this is the you cannot alter, damage or destroy the basic structure. Now this basic structure is not defined. What is this basic structure? But you cannot alter the basic structure. So they corrected the Golaknath case. Golaknath case had said that the amending power and the legislative power are the same. But they've said no, amending power and the legislative power are not the same. They are different. And also some other judgments that we've discussed last time, ki preamble is also the part of the constitution. If it's a part of the constitution, yes, you can go ahead and amend it, not an issue. So these were, we have a very wide ramifications. Then obviously came the Vaman Rao case, Minerva Mills case, and then obviously it was upheld. We don't want to go into it, but that's the idea of the Keshwanand Bharti case. Keshwanand Bharti upheld the idea of the judicial review as the basic structure of the constitution, and that cannot be taken away by any of the parliamentary amendments act. So basically, Keshwanand Bharti was a very seminal judgment, and when he died in September, it brings us an opportunity to read more about it. All these parts, again, just to reiterate, all these parts you must have read in your basic static polity thing, but just for the revision sake, we have done it. Now let us do 5 questions, as we do 5 questions of polity that I have kept. One is a previous year question. There is a parliamentary system of government in India, because when we say that there is a parliamentary system of in India, what do we mean by that? Lok Sabha is directly elected by people. Parliament can amend the constitution. Rajya Sabha cannot be devolved, and Council of Minister is responsible to the Lok Sabha. This question forms the part of the must. This also becomes the part of the conceptual area of the polity, where a lot of emphasis is there from the UPSC. Even if you look the past 3 to 4 years, every year you can see 1 to 2 questions being asked on these lines. In the polity, some basic constitutional and the parliamentary features. Please try the question. Now, for this very basic idea, that you need to understand the difference between the presidential versus the parliamentary form of the government. Okay? That's given in your basic book that we all read. Now, India adopted a parliamentary form of government. That means we only vote for our MPs, MP and MLAs. We don't vote directly for the Modi ji, right? Now, within this legislature, they select, the highest party select its leader, and that leader is Modi ji. We have not selected directly or voted for Modi ji. We have, for example, in Lucknow, I have voted for, let's say, Rajnath Singh he's a BJP MP, hypothetically. I have not voted for Mr. Narendra Modi, but in every parliamentary seat, the majority leader has been selected as Narendra Modi. But presidential democracy, the best example is USA. Elections happen differently. For example, for legislature, the different election happen, and for president, a different election happen. Joe Biden, presidential election. Different election for Senate and different election for House of Representatives. Okay? So, in the parliamentary democracy, executive is responsible to the legislative. So this is written in your article 75.3. Council of Ministers shall be collectively responsible to the House of the People, that is Lok Sabha. Right? So Council of Ministers will be responsible to the Lok Sabha, and that's why it is a parliamentary democracy. Because if you see in the presidential form, this happens. Lok Sabha can directly elected by the people. Yes, it is there in the parliamentary and the presidential form. Parliament cannot amend the constitution, can amend the constitution. This can happen in both the presidential and parliamentary. Rajya Sabha cannot be dissolved. This can again be there in both the systems. But the responsibility part is there only in the parliamentary system. So that means that we don't have the very strict separation of power doctrine that is given by the Montesquieu, which is there in the USA. But we have a checks and balances system. So these are the very basic concept that you need to understand, difference between the parliamentary and the presidential form of government. Let us see one more question. In this context, okay, sorry. So basically the question is, consider the following statement regarding the deputy speaker. He is appointed after the elections of the speaker has taken place. He presides over the joint sitting if the speaker is absent from such sitting. A member wishing to give notice of the resolution for removal of the deputy speaker shall do so in writing to the speaker. It's a very easy question. It's in the news because for the whole 1 year, since the 19th Lok Sabha has come into being, the deputy speaker has not been appointed. Okay. Now, that's the problem. Why this in the 17th Lok Sabha, sorry. Now, for example, more than 556 days, deputy speaker has not been appointed. So deputy speaker post is a that bites in the news. Now, Om Birla, the speaker, has said it's not the speaker's job to appoint the deputy speaker when asked to him that why the deputy speaker post is empty. Now, let us learn something about deputy speaker. So, deputy speaker is under Article 93 to talk about the election of the speaker and the deputy speaker. He is elected by the Lok Sabha member among himself. From the 11th Lok Sabha, there is a convention that it's a convention. Remember, it's not a rule that he will be from the opposition political party. Okay? The date is fixed or election date fixed by the speaker, and if the situation is vacant, the election happens again. Now, when the deputy speaker is not a subordinate to speaker, he is an independent office. So when the speaker is not there, deputy speaker is there. So for example, similar work being done at the joint sitting as well under Article 108. So under the joint sitting also, if the speaker is not present, the deputy speaker will be there. Some of the special privileges that deputy speaker enjoys, that is, if the deputy speaker is a part of any committee, then he will automatically become the chairman. He can cease to be the member. For example, if he loses his election, not the part of Lok Sabha, if he resigns, or if he is removed. If he is removed, then the member has to submit the notice not to the speaker but to the secretary general, and such resolution can be moved after having the 14-day advance notice. Okay? And by majority they do it. So since 11th Lok Sabha, there has been the consensus that the speaker comes from the ruling party and the post of deputy speaker from the opposition party. Chalo. So the options, let us see the options. First is appointed by the election of the speaker. Obviously, after the election, only the deputy speaker election takes place. He can preside over the joint sitting. Yes. A member wishing to give the resolution for the removal of the deputy speaker, do so to the speaker. No, to the secretary general. Okay. So third option is wrong. First and second statement is right. Next question is with respect to the special leave petition. Special leave power of the special leave of the Parliament, Supreme Court of India. It's a discretionary power and hence cannot be claimed as a matter of right. It is granted in the final judgments only. It may be granted to the matters related to the income tax. It may be granted against the order of the military courts. It's a very simple and straightforward question. These are again part of your must. Chalo. Now, special leave, more importantly, that you must have read in your book. But apart from that, I'll also give you economic survey insight as well. Now, special leave to appeal by the Supreme Court under Article 136. It's a discretionary power. Hence, only the discretion of the Supreme Court will be there. Nobody from any court or tribunal cannot say, no, give us a special leave. So that's what he said. It is not claimed as a matter of right. So it's not a matter of right for the any court or tribunal. Any court or tribunal will say, or anyone will say, okay, Supreme Court, take it as a special leave. No, it is only the discretion of the Supreme Court. And this Supreme Court can take this special leave only from the orders of the court or tribunal, not the military tribunal or the court martial. So military courts not involved. Next, granted in any judgment. So it's a final judgment or interlocutory judgment. At any stage, Supreme Court has this power to take it upon itself. Related to any matter, that is civil, constitutional, tax, labor, any matter. Except this, obviously military matter. Supreme Court itself has said that it's an exceptional and overriding power. It has to be exercised sparingly and with caution only in the special extraordinary situation. Only in the extraordinary situations we have to apply this power, without which, apart from it, we should not do that. But your economic survey, so this is your article 136, which talks about this. But economic survey in 2017 has found out that how much special leave cases have been taken up by the Supreme Court, around 48% cases. 40% cases. So Supreme Court admits the special leave petitions under Article 136 increased from 25% to 40%. And they compare it with the USA, where and Canada only 3 and 9% is there. So Supreme Court takes upon itself a lot of responsibility, and this is why this is 85% of the pendencies there in this special leave petition cases. So they say that Supreme Court itself has taken upon itself a lot of responsibility, and this is not good. Overall, it is hampering that is the ease of doing justice. That was the topic of your economic survey chapter. So the answer is, let us see the points. It's a discretionary power, cannot be claimed matter of right. Yes. It can be granted only in the final judgment. No. It may be related to the matter related to income tax. Yes. It can be granted against the order of the military courts. No. So answer is 1 and 3. Chalo. Let us see the next question. Which of the following suggested the governor should be an eminent person from outside of the state and should be detached figure without intense political links, or should not have taken part in the politics in the recent past? It's a 2019 question. So first, Administrative Reform Commission, Rajamannar Committee, Sarkaria Commission, and NCRWC. So for example, we read these recommendations as a part of our way forward in the mains exam, but you can see how they have been asked in the prelims as well. So some of the major committees recommendation you should know, है ना? Sarkaria Commission, Punchi Commission, Rajamannar Commission, second ARC, thoda thoda for prelims. For mains, obviously, this can be wonderful. Chaliye. So in 1983, very important commission was set up. That was Sarkaria Commission, obviously related to the ideas of federalism. So it 1983 appointed, 1988 submitted its report. Term has been extended. Now, the Sarkaria Commission says that everything is fine, structure is fine. That means we don't have to do a lot of changes in the constitution per se, but changes has been needed in the functional aspects of it. They say some very good lines are there. The federalism is a functional arrangement of the cooperative action rather than a static institutional concept. So it needs to be seen as a functional thing. A strong center, they say that the strong center is required for the unity integrity of India, because they at that time 1980s you can see Punjab crisis happening. In a background may think about it. Punjab crisis is there. Economically we are very weak. LPG reforms have not taken place. Those say that, imagine that time, 1980s, that a lot of centrifugal tendencies are there to break away the country. In 1987, Kashmir militancy has started. But they say that strong center needs to be there, but that should not lead to the centralization of power. They say if the centralization of the power is there, that means that blood pressure at the center and enemy at the periphery. You have a lot of pressure at the center, and here you don't have anything. Some of the major recommendations, for example, set up a permanent interstate council accepted under Article 263. Center should consult states on the law on the concurrent list, accept taxation, residuary power should be given to the states. President, while withholding the assent, should communicate the reasons why they are not signing on the acts coming from the state governments. Governors, very extensive recommendation, consult chief minister before appointment of the governor. Governor cannot dismiss council of minister of the state in the state as long as they enjoy the majority. 5-year terms should not be disturbed unless until exceptional cases are there. An eminent person outside politics, outside the state, should be governor. So that was the recommendation of the Sarkaria Commission. The last question: state legislative assembly members can vote in the elections to office of the president, vice president, legislative council, and governor. It's a very straightforward and very easy question. So state legislative assembly members. Now, one option, obviously, you can eliminate the governor. Obviously, governor is not elected. So first option is wrong. Now, office of president electoral college, basically, president electoral college includes only the elected members. Why not the nominated members? Because you can say that it is the president who nominates these members. So it would be a conflict of interest. That is why the nominated members are not there. Only elected members from Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, and also the legislative assemblies. Why legislative assemblies? Because president is the head of the state. State does not include only the parliament or the center, but also the state. So you also need the participation from the state legislative assemblies. While the vice president is elected, as well as nominated members take part, and both the house of the parliament and legislative assembly people do not take the part in his election. Okay, so this is thing to be remembered. Last time we have discussed about legislative council. So here, when they are elected, they are voted by the legislative assembly members. Okay, so legislative assembly members participate in the election of president of India. Yes. Vice president of India, no. Legislative Council, yes, and Governor, no. So answer is 1 and 3. So with this, we finish our chapter on polity as well. I know the length of the videos are long. It's because of the 5 questions that are being attached to it. But I'm telling you one thing, if you can see the video, if you see the video once and you revise from the PDF, this will add a lot of value to your preparation. Do the static part and current affairs, whatever you're reading, read the newspaper, and at the end come to the video and just revise that you have not missed out anything or any concept that you want to clarify. Any questions you want to ask us, put it into the comment box. So in the next session, we'll talk about the ecology. Only 4 sessions are left in the September, 2 of ecology and 2 of science and tech. And with this, we'll finish the September month and we'll start the October month. Till then, bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.